Okay, the first rule that you need to know is that the derivative of a constant is 0. So what that means is, like, if you have y equals a certain number, just a constant function, the derivative of that's going to be 0. So for example, if you have y equals 9, then the derivative of that y prime would be 0. And then if you look at that graphically, so if you have y equals 9, the slope of that is 0, so it makes sense that it's going to be 0. So the derivative of a number is always 0. The second rule that you need to know is the derivative of something like this. I don't know what to call this rule, but if you have y equals 6x, the derivative of this is just going to be the number in front of x. So you could say y equals cx, y prime equals c. So in this case, y prime equals 6. Okay? That's another rule that you need to know. The next rule kind of goes along with that rule, and it's called the power rule. This basically says that y equals x to the n, y prime equals n times x to the n minus 1. So what you're going to do here, you're going to bring the n out in front and then subtract 1 from the exponent. So bring your n down in front and subtract 1 from the exponent. That's the power rule. So if you have, like, we actually did this. So remember, we had y equals x squared. Remember, the derivative of y equals x squared was y equals 2x, which is the same thing as y equals 2x to the first. So y prime. So I brought 2 down in front, and then I subtracted 1 from the exponent. So I have 2 times x to the first, which is just 2x. So that's the power rule. Another thing with the power rule is you can always pull, so say I have y equals 3x squared. I can always pull this constant out and just focus on the x squared. So the derivative of x squared is 2x, right? Well, I pulled the 3 out earlier, so I can just multiply the 3 in later, which equals 6x. So y prime would equal 6x, because you have 3 times 2 times x. I think that was all I had for that. If you wanted to take the derivative of y prime, so if you wanted to take a second derivative, y prime prime would just be 6, right? Because it's this rule that we talked about up here, that if you just have constant multiplied by x, the derivative is always just a constant. Okay, the next rule is called the, do you see that? Sum slash difference rule. And what this says is I can break, so say I have an equation like y equals x squared plus 3x plus 1. This says that I can break this up, so when I have sums or subtraction, addition or subtraction in the equation, I can break it up into steps. So the derivative of this is 2x, we just did that. Derivative of this is 3, and the derivative of this is 0, because it's just a number. So y prime is 2x plus 3. If we have a subtraction, okay, so if we had a subtraction, the same rule would apply. So I'm going to use the power rule here, bring the 3 out, subtract 1, so I'm going to have 9x squared minus 2. Okay, that's the sum or the difference rule. The next rule is called the product rule, which is a little more complicated. So the product rule says if I have a function u times v, and I want to differentiate that, the formula is going to be u times the derivative of v plus v times the derivative of u. So to remember this, you just take the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first, and you just add the two together. So for example, if I had the, let's say, x squared y equals x squared plus 1 times x to the third plus 3. Well, this is my u, or v, it doesn't matter. This will be my v. So according to this formula, I'm going to take u, which is x squared plus 1, times the derivative of v. So the derivative of v is 3x squared plus 0, plus v, because we're here now, x to the third plus 3, times the derivative of u, which is 2x plus 0. So that's the product rule. The next rule you need to know is called the quotient rule. Whoops. All right, the quotient rule. So say I have a function u over v. I want to take the derivative of that. The quotient rule says this. It's going to equal v times the derivative of u minus u times the derivative of v all over v squared. So that's the formula, but you don't want to remember that. This is what you want to remember. Low d high minus high d low all over low squared. So low d high minus high d low all over low squared. It's the same thing, but this is easier to remember. So if we do an example, we'll do x squared minus 1 over x squared plus 1. So low d high, so my low value, or my low, whatever you want to call it, is x squared plus 1 times the derivative of high, so that's 2x minus high d low, so high x squared minus 1, derivative of low is just 2x plus 0. You see that? All over low squared, x squared plus 1 squared. And then you can simplify that. But y prime is equal to that. So that's the quotient rule. And I believe that's the last rule you need to know. One more thing. You get something like 1 over x to the third, and you need to take the derivative of that. The easiest way to do that is to make this x to the negative 3, because x to the negative 3 is the same thing as 1 over x to the third, right? If there's a negative power, you can just put it over 1 and that power becomes positive. So to take the derivative of x equals x to the negative 3, we're going to bring the number out front, so negative 3, x, and then we're going to subtract 1 from the exponent, so negative 4, and that's the derivative. So y prime is equal to that. Or you could say negative 3 over x to the 4. So there's a trick to that. There's a formal definition on how to take the derivative of all these things, but you don't really need to know that. That's not really important. If you just know these rules, you'll be fine, because these are the quick ways to do it, not the long ways. We'll do one more, kind of like the physics example, because you'll probably need to know that. So if I have a position equation, y or x is equal to 2x squared plus 3x plus 10. That's my position equation. And I want to know the velocity. Say, find the velocity and acceleration at 3 seconds. So this is my position equation. My velocity equation is just the derivative of that, right? So I'm going to have 4x plus 3 plus 0. So that's my velocity equation. And then my acceleration is just the derivative of velocity, right? So it's just going to be 4, right? Because this is the only term. These are going to be zeros. And then the derivative of 4x is just 4. So my acceleration will be 4, always. So to find the velocity and acceleration at 3 seconds, I can just plug in 3 for my variable right here. So velocity equals, sometimes they won't use x, sometimes they'll use t. So you'll have like x of t, v of t, a of t, and these won't be x's in the equation, they will be t's in the equation. So let's just make them t's, it'll be easier. 2t squared plus 3t plus 10. And then this would be 4t plus 3, then a of t would just be 4. So at 3 seconds, v is equal to 4 times 3. I'm just plugging 3 seconds into my equation. So that's 15, say meters per second, and then acceleration, well, it doesn't matter what my time is for acceleration, it'll always be 4. So that's kind of one of the problems you might come up with that.